Hey, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to St. Mary's. If we haven't met before, my name's Matt, and I'm one of the leaders here. And at this time of year, we like to make some space to really talk about what the Bible says about money and giving. And for the benefit of those of you who weren't here last week to hear John speak, he shared about how at a recent PCC meeting, which is kind of like our church council, that there was a little bit of feedback that said, we think gift days, they need to sort of really appeal more to the vision of the church rather than just filling a gap in our annual budget. And so we've listened to that feedback, and this is going to be slightly different if you've been around for some time. I'm going to give some teaching from the Bible about giving because I think that's really important and we need it. But then a little bit later on, Lisa, who runs our youth work, is going to come and share a little bit of the vision that she believes that God has given to her about our youth work. Now, before I begin, I just want to offer a very, very short caveat. If you are a guest or a visitor here, please just sit back and relax and make yourself comfortable. Feel free just to allow your mind to wander as I speak. Of course, if you are a Christian and visiting, you may find the principles and the teaching of interest, and you may want to take it and give generously to the church community that you are connected to elsewhere. And if you're not a Christian, I'm sure I'm fulfilling every single one of your expectations by talking about money right now. Just to reassure you, we do not talk about money every single week. We just do it twice a year. But when we do talk about it, we lock the doors and we demand bang. No, I'm just joking. We're just joking. I hope that what I've got to say today will be interesting to you, but know that the actual application of giving to the church here doesn't apply to you. Now, I must say, sensitive about the way that money has been spoken about in the church. It has, on the one hand, been used as something of a stick to beat people with. Call yourself a Christian, shouldn't you be giving more money? And also, on the other hand, there's been a fair amount of terrible theology connected to it. The prosperity gospel, which I'm sure you've heard of, either in its classic form, serve God and get rich, or in its new form, for a swiping, scrolling, bulky, trained generation, God wills your prosperity, God says it, simply claim it, and it's yours. Who says Christianity and manifestation can't go hand in hand? Me. Sorry, TikTokers. Now, that's two very good reasons not to talk about money. A less good reason not to talk about money is, of course, that at various points in our lives, subjects like money and service and sin challenge us because they cut to the very heart of how much we are willing to let Jesus be in charge of our lives. This is where the rubber hits the road with our faith. And of course, there are some areas that we find easier than others to let God in. Martin Luther once said there are three conversions: the conversion of the mind, the conversion of the heart, and the conversion of the purse, the hardest of which is the purse. And here is Martin Luther on a purse, because why not? There are lots of reasons not to talk about money. Jesus, however, talks about money an awful lot. 16 out of 38 of the parables are about money. About 1/6 of the synoptic gospels, Jesus is talking about money. He speaks about it a lot. Why? Because he knows that it's a powerful force, both for good and for bad. So today, I'd like you to join with me. Let us not beat ourselves with the money stick, and let us avoid the bad theology of the prosperity gospel, which has nothing to do with Jesus, who had nowhere to lay his head. Instead, let's just go for the real thing, shall we go? A proper biblical understanding of money so that we might be healthy and free and all the things that Jesus wants us to be. Because money has this really strange tendency to make us think that if we just have a little bit more, we'll finally be free. We'll finally be happy. But of course, that isn't the case. And we should remember that Jesus does long for us to be free and to be happy. When he enters into the scene and gives his first sermon, he says, I'm here to proclaim good news to the poor, the year of Jubilee. But happiness and money and freedom and money are not necessarily connected, certainly in the way that society tells us we are. Jesus says, instead, be all about him, be all about his kingdom. Can we do that? Can we be about Jesus and his kingdom instead? Just me. So, last week, John, I really appreciate all of you. Last week, John looked at Acts and the early Christian believers who, upon being filled with the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, went on to see their wealth and their possessions not merely as their own, but really available for the common use. And today, what I want to do is I want to look at a very well-known parable. I'm sure you'll all be familiar with it, from Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 14. Here it is on the screen. For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I've made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I've made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received 1 talent, came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. And so I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and you gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received that which was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, give it to the one who has 10 talents, for to everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, into the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, this parable, it comes right at the end of Matthew's gospel, just a little bit before his arrest and his eventual execution. It's part of what's known as the farewell discourse. And these are prophetic announcements and parables about Jesus' final return. So the parable before this one, it's all about being prepared. And the parable after this one is all about responsibility whilst we wait, which of course you may have noticed is exactly what this parable is also about. But the general theme is time is short. Use what God has given you for his kingdom. Now, there are a couple of tricky issues that could distract us from hearing what Jesus is trying to say to us. So let me just start by addressing those first. The master, as I'm sure you gathered, stands for God. But the master does not mean that is a perfect description of what God is like, e.g. reaping where he has not sown, e.g. stealing, and the excessive punishment dished out to the third servant. Jesus' first Jewish listeners would know that God was neither a hard man nor someone who didn't reap where he had sown. In fact, he's loving. In fact, he's merciful and he's kind. And so what Jesus is doing is he's providing a rhetorical device to make a point, which is, of course, what the parables are trying to do. Like we can all imagine, can't we, a harsh, a shrewd master. Well, Jesus is saying that even though God is merciful and kind, he expects something from his people. He expects them to use what they have been entrusted with. The outer darkness where the third servant is cast, it's an image of Sheol. It's an image used to describe being outside of God's presence. Now, in Jewish thought at that particular time, there wasn't a massive concept about the afterlife. This image was an image that would be understood in your very life right now. It was very possible to be walking in darkness in this moment. It was possible to be alive and dead at the same time, and this was not a position to be desired. Simply put, this parable and the ones around it are a warning to the Pharisees and to Israel that time is short. Do something meaningful for my kingdom. Now, let me explain the rest of the parable. The master stands for God. We've covered that. He gives talents to 3 servants, which stands for people just like you and me. And a talent is a weight used to measure gold, silver, or other precious metals. The NIV translates this just as bags of gold. It's a very good translation. Ultimately, the master here is giving his servants money. And of course, sometimes we read this parable, we go, oh, talents, it must be about gifts and abilities. And of course, we could extrapolate out for it to mean that, but ultimately, Jesus is talking about dollar. Point number 1 from this parable, God has all the money and he doles it out. He owns all the money in your wallet. He owns all the money in your bank. He owns all the money in all of the world. As the psalmist says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. As God says in Exodus, the whole earth is mine. God owns it all. Now, this is a sticking point from the very start, isn't it? Because we would much rather see ourselves as the master, and often we believe that we are. This is my money. I worked for it. I own it. These are my possessions. This is my lovely black shirt and corduroy trousers that I bought with my money. I chose them. I get to decide what I do with my cash. But it would be much better if we actually heard the voice of Jesus in this moment, that it's all God's. It's all God's and it's all his, and he chooses who to distribute it to. Now, we will not have missed the fact that there are people in this world who earn a lot more than other people. This is obvious. It's also obvious by the fact that this is the way that we just seem to measure how somebody is doing well. The metric for how people are doing is their wealth. Oh, that person's very rich. They must be doing very well. Ultimately, this is a lie. It just exposes the lie of money, that this is just what all of life is about, just making more and more cash. And Jesus says it isn't. It isn't even ours. We didn't earn it. It's God's, and he distributes it as he likes. So the fact that the servants receive different amounts is not of much significance to Jesus whatsoever. They receive, as it says in the text, according to their ability and not their status. One is not more loved than the other. The response that is given by the master to the servant who received 5 and received 2 is exactly the same. Well done, good and faithful servant. They're treated equally because they're equal in status, as are all people on the earth. The fact that they're given different amounts to start with is not because of their status, it's because of their abilities. And we know this. We know this to some extent to be true, that some people are just very, very, very smart, and some people aren't as smart. Some people are very good at starting new businesses, and other people aren't. Some people are extremely good with cash, and other people aren't. This is the reality we live in. And of course, I say that, and that needs to be held in tension with our reality, that actually people inherit enormous sums of money as well, that systems are in place that have kept people from gaining wealth. This is a parable. It's a parable. It's a story. It's not a perfect story. It's trying to make a point. We don't just all start at 0 and receive 5, 2, or 1 talents. Do not miss the point that Jesus is making by focusing on the point that you think Jesus ought to be making about wealth inequality. The reality is, some people receive an awful lot of money over the course of their lives and other people don't. Is it fair? No, not really. Of course it isn't. Of course, this is only a problem if we make one of 2 mistakes or both. Firstly, we make the mistake of believing that money is the thing that actually makes us happy. And 2, we believe that money is a sign of God's blessing, neither of which is true. And if we can free ourselves, or indeed be set free from believing these falsehoods, we will see everything differently. We will be free. But of course, not having any money whatsoever is not good. And we're going to come to that in just a moment. So let us not worry about where we are in the pecking order. The point is that it's all God's anyway. And his desire is that every single one of us would play an important role in administering what is an enormous bounty, whether we are a 5, a 2, or a 1 talent person. Each talent is worth approximately 20 years' wages. So the average annual salary in the UK at this point in time is £35,000. And so the servant who receives 1 talent is receiving about £700,000 as a lump sum. The master is giving millions and millions and millions away. It's an absolute abundance. And so God liberally administers his money, and he asks that we, in turn, would administer it well. And so do not feel guilty if you have lots of money. And do not feel resented nor frustrated if you have less. Instead, the invitation to all of us is to follow Paul's example of learning how to be content in times of plenty and indeed times of scarcity. Do not chase after money, particularly money that will never be ours, because it's never going to satisfy anyway. If we had all the money in the world, it would only offer a small, false sense of comfort. Like, do we actually need to hear another story who came into an enormous sum of money and simultaneously became deeply unhappy? Some people who pursue money, they make an awful lot of money, but they just keep going, making more cash. It's because they're ultimately looking for something to satisfy, but money isn't big enough to even do that. You know, the richest man in the world, John Rockefeller, was once asked by a journalist, like, how much money is enough money? To which he replied, just a little bit more. Instead, Jesus says, pursue the one thing that can be yours, that actually does satisfy me and my kingdom. Pursue that, go after that. It's the only thing that will satisfy and bring completeness at a fundamental level. And so whilst some have more money and some have less, let us also acknowledge that God's desire is that nobody lives in need. Throughout the scripture, God compels his people to look after and care for the poor. And this is why we as a church go to great lengths to run the social supermarket every single week. And the homeless meal, which happened last night and was in fact the largest homeless meal we've ever put on at this church. It's why, as a community, we have a fellowship fund for those who find themselves in financial need. These are vital and godly parts of our shared life together. It's why Vicky's story is so powerful. It's an opportunity where we actually get to do the thing that God is asking us to do. The point is, God has all the money. And so let's be continually thankful for everything we have received. And let's hold it with open hands and not a clenched fist. And so my question to you right now is money ruling you? Is it ruling you? Or that's just a question. Or are you living blissfully uncontrolled by it? Symptoms of money being in charge might include a deep anxiety about money, not even wanting to look at your bank account, because so long as you don't look at it, there's probably loads in there. Alternatively, unrestricted spending. You just can't stop yourself hoarding more stuff that you just don't need. Now, my personal money-ruling gremlin is fantasizing about money. I love to fantasize about what will happen when I finally win the Euro Millions or even the Omaze property. I'm definitely going to win that one day. The time I've noticed, the time that I spend fantasizing about these things, the time that I spend involved in these games is actually closely linked to my anxiety about money. When I'm trusting in God and in his provision that he will look after me, I almost entirely forget about the lottery app on my phone or the Omaze adverts which come up. It just offloads itself into the cloud somewhere. But when I am worried, suddenly this is what I need to be doing. I start thinking about all these things. And so if you are aware of the fantasizing or the anxiety or the unrestricted spending, and you realize that that's actually revealing money's control over you, do you know the best thing that you can possibly do with that? You can bring it to Jesus. Things really breed in the darkness and in the shadows when we keep it down underneath in our shame. So much better to speak it out, bring it up into the service and let God breathe his fresh air all over them. Tell him about it and watch how the power of those things dissipate and as freedom comes. We're called so often in the New Testament to be filled with the Holy Spirit in order to have our hearts changed, transformed, renewed more into the likeness of Jesus. All matters of money are at the heart matters of the heart. Only the Spirit can change our hearts, and so we have to let him in. We have to welcome him in right in at the center. The point is, all the money is God's. Have that as your starting point. The second point, and the issue at the very heart of this parable, is what will we do with what we have been given? The first two servants, they take what they've been given and they make more with it. They're not idle, which is the master's critique of the third servant, slothful. The reason for this isn't because God is this horrible taskmaster. The reason is because we were just made to work. We're made in the image of a God who is always at work. The very first commandment given to Adam and Eve was to go out and till the land, to bring order and chaos beyond the boundaries of the garden, to bring more life. This is why depression is so common among the retired and the unemployed. Part of us just isn't fully alive without a purpose to work towards. And as a church community, we just need to really take care of one another who find themselves in long periods of unemployment. It's important that we do that. The first two servants make more money, and the master is pleased, not just because of the result, but also because of the method by which they made money. You have been good and faithful. There are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different ways to make money, and not all of them are good. Purely making money is not the end in itself, and therefore the method is of utmost importance. So let's avoid get-rich-quick schemes, gambling, playing the lottery. Speak to myself here. Not only will you never win it, I might win it, you're never going to win it. It's about being fruitful. It's about using what God has given you to make the world a better place. It's what we're called to do as Christians. In contrast, use your gifts, use your abilities, use your drives to earn a living, which ultimately is the problem with the final servant. Perhaps he just felt completely overburdened by the sum. Can you just imagine for a moment that your boss gives you £1 million and says, well, I'll be back soon for some more. It'd be quite stressful. I'd be useless at that. It'd be very scary. So perhaps he's scared. Maybe he just is wicked and lazy, and he does nothing with what he's been given. This is a massive, massive, massive mistake. What have you got? Don't worry that it's not the same as other people may have, or it's not as impressive in your eyes as it might be in others. What have you got, and what are you going to do with it? Point 3, using money well means giving it back all of it. The servants give it back to the master. They give all of it back. It'd be tempting, wouldn't it, if you were the servant who received 5 million and made 5 million more, just think, oh, I'll just give 9.5 and I'll keep half back for myself. I'm doing pretty well. I'll be fine. But they don't. They don't do it, do they? They give it all back because they know it's all the master's anyway, and he commends them as being trustworthy and faithful. What God is really looking for is he's looking for people who want to build his kingdom, who are trustworthy and faithful, who knows what really matters, who will invest and reinvest themselves, their gifts, their abilities, their money in the one thing that has eternal meaning, his kingdom. And as they give their talents and prove themselves to be faithful, more is given to them. And this is the promise. The more we prove ourselves trustworthy, the promise is that more and more and more and more will be given to us. Now, to be completely clear about this, and I hope you are listening to this bit, we do not give in order to receive. That's not the point. We don't do that. This is not how God works. God is not some sort of celestial slot machine in the sky where you put £1 in and you get 10 back. Notice that the servant's reward is not greater wealth, it's greater responsibility. You're going to have even more stuff in order to make more money. They remain the master's servants throughout. He does not become their sugar daddy. Agreed? Should get a t-shirt with that on. The reward that they get is of much more value than just cash. They get to share in their master's joy, to share in the joy of the king, in the beauty of his kingdom, love and joy, peace, fulfillment, fullness of life, right here, right now, and completely in the future. So, what, therefore, should we do with our money? John Wesley summed up his teaching on money like this. Make all you can, save all you can, give all you can. I think we've covered make all you can. Save all you can. Biblical saving is not just about hoarding up loads of stuff on earth, obviously. It's not about giving ourselves a sense of security, because money just can't do that. And it's not about being thrifty either. Instead, it's the antidote to the Western pressure that calls us to live beyond our means. It's a sign of financial responsibility. It's a resistance to being a financial burden on others, which is important. And it's a way of being able to give back to God's kingdom in the future, particularly after we have passed away. As Proverbs says, a good person leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Make all you can, save all you can, give all you can in two ways. Firstly, freely and without caution, just like God does. God gives that which is of infinite value, himself, to death for us. The gospel makes no sense. It is silly. It is crazy. And sometimes we just have to be silly with our money. Free yourself by giving away and not counting the pennies. Be the first person at the bar to buy a round of the person next to you. Pay more than 20% on a tip at the end of a night. Find someone and just give them some money. It'll be brilliant for you. Brilliant for them, of course, and brilliant for God and his kingdom. Sometimes we just have to be silly with our money. Secondly, give prudently, knowledgeably, and regularly. And just to be clear, this does not contradict the first point. Research and back the winners. Do everything you can to ensure that the things that you care about and you already support will thrive into the future by giving your time, your talent, and your treasure. Invest in kingdom things so that they have the best kingdom return. Now, you do not need to give all of your money to the church. You should give some of your money to the church and some of your money to other things, other charities that you care about, like donkey charities. Not donkey charities, other charities. There is a cognitive dissonance to not giving to the church that you belong to. It's kind of like, well, I belong, but I don't really belong. Your wallet is very much part of who you are. And you want to try and give yourself fully to the things that you belong to insofar as you can. And so you want to try and give money to your church because when you do, you'll be fully invested or more fully invested in it. You will care about how the church does. You will see yourself as helping the church and you will thrive as you see your church thrive and the people in it. There are no rules about how much or how often we give. You'll be familiar that the Old Testament has a law of the tithe, giving 10% of our income to God. This doesn't apply now. Like the Old Testament, I love it, but it's fulfilled. Don't worry about it. Do not be bound by the 10%. And I know lots of churches will say it's a good guide, or 10% is the minimum, or it's the ideal. Personally, I'm just a good charismatic. Would you just follow the Spirit? Spirit, what are you saying? How much ought I to give? He'll tell you. Monthly giving is, of course, very helpful. It means that it's done. It means that you can turn up to services like this and go, yep, I'm all sorted. And it gives you the opportunity to give over and above when you feel the Spirit is calling you to do so. It's certainly very helpful for organizations and charities like ourselves to plan for the future if we know what's coming in each month in our budget. Prudently, knowledgeably, regularly invest in kingdom things so that they might have the best kingdom return. Would you please back the winners? And speaking of winners, Lisa.
Living up to hype feels like expectation, and expectation makes me run. No, I'm joking. I'm Lisa. If you don't know me, I oversee the kids work. I don't do that, thank goodness for Angie. Youth. 11 to 18-year-olds, they're my people. Usually I'm here in the morning, but you look at me, I'm out in the evening. What's going on? And I was here last week, so sorry if you were here last week. You're going to hear me repeat myself a little bit. So, enjoy yourselves. A little context for St Mary's Youth. In the past, St Mary's Youth has been quite small, a handful of young people. But over the last few years, or last 5 years or so, we've grown to a group of over 30, seeing around 20 each Sunday morning. Bucking the national trend. Let's celebrate that. And I think there's a number of reasons for this. I'm going to give God most of that credit, or all of it. But I also think, in large part, I have spent most of my adult life, the vast majority of my 20s, all of my 30s, in this church. And a lot of the values that are core to St Mary's are very much my values too. Things like having fun, welcoming and accepting people as they are, giving them the freedom to engage as much or as little as they want to, not telling young people what to believe, but allowing them to explore faith for themselves. In the hope that, they can, as they consider it for themselves and own it for themselves, they'll open themselves to the presence of God, experience God for themselves, and then God becomes undeniable to them. And they go off into adulthood as Christians. It's glorious. Did you see the formula? There isn't a formula. It doesn't quite work like that. But I want to give them freedom, curiosity, explore for themselves and own their faith for themselves, and then we get to see them fly. And I think for those who have most regularly come to St Mary's Youth, a real sense of family has emerged. And out of these close relationships, real conversations about how they're doing have emerged. Real conversations about the stuff of life, what's happening for them, the good stuff, the more challenging stuff. And as they've owned their faith, we have seen a greater risk-taking in terms of opening themselves to God, hearing God's voice, sharing those things with one another. And as we've seen this kind of transition happen, we've also seen a greater confidence in bringing friends along to church or wider family members. And some of those have joined the youth group, which is brilliant. Others come and visit every so often. But I would say most of those, the vast majority, have some sort of faith or church background. So what about the young people that have no relationship to church and no understanding of God? I mentioned this last week, and you will know them yourselves, but there are a lot of negative narratives around young people. Whether it's to do with mental health, or youth violence, or knife crime, particularly here in London, or dangerous risk-taking behaviour. I rarely use the term teenager. I will always refer to my young people as young people because of just how negative the connotations are around that word. And you can add into that the wider societal stories that we all have to engage with, things like the climate change, continued racism and discrimination, cost of living crisis, the competitive job markets, there's no guarantees even if you do make it to the end of the long journey of education, unattainable beauty standards, unhealthy ideas around sex that come directly from pornography, toxic role models that influence how young people behave towards each other, particularly towards young women. All this stuff they are grappling with and hearing, and it's surrounding them all the time, and it paints a very bleak and hopeless picture. But it's in the face of this hopelessness that we, the church, have something real to offer. However, for most young people outside of the church, God is unknown to them. And we Christians are in large either irrelevant or problematic. And the idea of coming into an old building to sing songs and to sit still and listen to someone talk to them for 20, 30 minutes is just not something they're going to choose to want to do. So what does church need to look like for these young people? Well, over the summer, when I was away with a bunch of young people, I felt like God showed me through our experience what church might look like for them. Young people really know how to have fun, and I think they need to have more fun in their lives. So let's create a space that's built around fun and joy and celebration. with a sense of family and hope woven throughout it all. So in my imagination, that is loud music, delicious food served family style. There is, maybe some TikTok filming happening in a corner. Let them do that. Maybe some silly games. Just lots and lots of fun, letting young people be young. But with content that also hits, which might be something like storytelling or interviews or spoken word or live music. Content that points towards something they have not yet seen or experienced. The person in whom real hope is found, Jesus. And I've run this idea past some of our young people, and they said they would come, but more importantly, they said that they would invite their friends to something like this. And I also feel like I look around at the young people that we have, and I can see how God would use their gifts, use who they are, to shape and lead something like this. I can see who the gatherers of people are, who the relationship builders are, who those who know how to host the most, those who really hear from God and are really good at sharing that in a really normal, life-giving way with others, those who are wise, and those who just exude fun when they lead or take charge of something. Having young people explore who they are, explore their gifts and their talents, that seriously excites me. We got to see a bit of it earlier in the year when they took over a morning service one Sunday, and it was seriously fun because we get to see something of what the church will look like in the future. And it is in very safe hands. If we want our church to continue to grow in all things inclusive and multicultural, well, our youth are where it's at. We need change now. Of course, we need to continue to work in the present, but we also need to invest in them long term so that one day we can all sit back and retire. Just let them roll with it. It'll be great. And I would hope that through this sort of unchurchy expression of church, which might be a bit messy, and that's okay, that we will build relationship with young people in the local area. And as they get to know us and we get to know them, we might discover how else we might best serve them. Because in my experience of community work, from my upbringing, any decent community work is always done in collaboration with members of the community and in response to felt need. But I have begun to imagine what it might look like, what we might roll out. Young people are, we've all been a young person, right? We remember what it's like. You're not a child anymore, and yet you're not a fully fledged adult. You're sort of caught in this uncomfortable tension at times. And there's always the adults in your life who have all the control over what you can do and all that sort of stuff. So what would it look like to listen to and amplify young people's voices? To hear from them about what they need and to sort of provide scaffolding and support and investment that might help them to affect the change that they want to see in their own lives, to give them greater agency of their own lives, but also in the communities and friendships that they have. What would it look like to invest positively in young people's mental health? To create safe spaces where they can be honest about where they're at, but also learn healthy habits to promote well-being, but also to help them to become emotionally literate so they can understand what they're feeling and why and express those things in healthy ways. And what would it look like for us to do something to help address educational inequality? Many of you will have attended school in London. I attended school outside of London, and everyone just went to the same school. Like, you did this, and then everyone went there together. And in London, it is really dependent on your postcode, which, of course, is hugely tied to income, right? I told this story last week, but earlier this year, I was invited to speak at a Christian Union at one of the best private schools in the country. And I haven't really engaged the private system much before, and honestly, it was so shockingly beautiful. Like, the facilities, the resources, it was very peaceful for a secondary school. It blew my mind, and the young people were articulate and confident, and it was just kind of blew my mind a little bit. But I came home and I burst into tears. Because that same week, I had been trying to help a mom arrange private tuition so that their child wouldn't flunk out of their GCSEs. And I didn't say this morning, but it was actually someone in this church that gave up their time for free to tutor that young person and got them over the line, and they got into the college that they wanted to go to, which was an amazing provision. But it was very, for me, it was like feeling the pain of like the almost two ends of the spectrum, and just how like prohibitive private tutoring is. I haven't engaged with that before, and it's just so expensive. So what would it look like to support those in our local area who need extra support to achieve academically, especially in those critical exam years, year 10 and 11 during GCSEs? Maybe it's a study club with gifted tutors and teachers there to offer support, computers and printers so they can create their coursework and print it out, and or even just providing a quiet space to study that they may not have at home. And I also wonder, amongst us, morning service as well, and you guys, what industries do we all represent that could potentially offer workplace mentoring, work experience placements, internships that would in turn provide motivation and direction for academic achievement? Because for better or for worse, academic achievement is what opens up doors. It is what provides choices about which college you go to, or which job you get, or potentially which university you can get into. If we want to talk about income inequality, then we need to do something about educational equality first. And when we were away together in the summer, there was a brilliant speaker, and she was speaking about the church and justice. And at the end of her talk, she invited all us youth groups to stand up as we are, as a group, and to pray for anything along the lines of injustice and justice. And we were gathered in sort of a circle. And as various members of the youth group were praying, I was reminded of my experience of that Friday and that week of being in this amazing private school and also dealing with trying to access private tutoring. And it came back to my mind. So I started praying along the lines of educational equality and justice in terms of the education system. And as I did, the Holy Spirit really fell on me very powerfully in a way that has happened only a few times. I began singing out in tongues. I felt this incredible weight on me. I was bent over. I was sobbing my heart out. Paul Caden, who was stood next to me, one of the young people, was sort of holding me up a little bit. And it was incredibly powerful, and it's happened to me a few times before, and every single time it has been God's compassion filling my heart. Like what I'm feeling, the pain and the heartache, I guess, for it is God's heart for the injustice in this area. And last Sunday, I spoke about this idea of what we might do to address educational inequality. And off the back of both morning and evening service, in-person conversations and emails that came into my inbox, I had a number of conversations with people who felt particularly moved about this particular area. And I found each conversation and each email hugely encouraging. And there were two conversations I had in particular that have stuck with me. Not only because the two individuals are extremely talented, gifted, and experienced in ways that would serve something like this extremely well, but also because as I'm speaking to them, they are crying as they talk to me. And what I saw in them was the compassion of God. Because kingdom change and transformation always starts with compassion, in my experience, through the Spirit. And so I now would be very surprised if we don't do something in this area, because it feels to me like God's already at work in the hearts of some of us, already leading the way through the Spirit. So, if you feel moved in some way by this, without any pressure to commit or anything, come and chat to me. Come and talk to me. Drop me an email. I would love to hear from you. We'll probably start by just gathering a few of us, probably the other side of Christmas, because I know how busy this season is. But in January, get together to pray and to think and to dream about what something like this might look like. In the past year, we have had some amazing highs in the youth group. The youth service being one, our trip away in the summer together being another. And we have got to see what church looks like when our young people experience God for themselves, to know a God who sees and knows and loves them, and who from out of that knowledge step out and take risks in their faith. They're beginning to understand what it is to have a hope that they can hold on to no matter what happens to them in life. To have a real, consistent love from their Father in heaven who shows up for them again and again and again when friends and others let them down. I've seen them have peace in the face of anxiety, strength to endure some of the toughest challenges, and I've seen them genuinely care for one another. And I'm seeing how their relationship with God influences the choices they make. And as they grow in independence, they're making some, oh my goodness me, if I made those decisions, I made a lot less mess when I was 17. And I also think they're realizing that having a relationship with God brings freedom. It's not about restriction of religion. It's like they're discovering, if I do this, I'm more fully me and fully alive. I think we're just getting started, and I am so desperate to see more of all of this for the young people that we're in relationship for. I want to see them become more of who they are and to grow in their relationship with God and see them take risks from that place. But I do not want us to stop there. As a church, I want us to have an impact on every young person that can get themselves to this building, so that we can play our part in changing the narratives that surround them, but also to help them write new stories so that their lives are filled with hope and transformation. That's you, Matt.
Thank you, Lisa. That's great. Bands, do you want to come on over? So, a little bit of business before we sing a song and take up a collection. There is, of course, sort of practical implications for everything that we've talked about. Today at Gift Day, we're looking to raise money as a church for all sorts of areas across the church. Obviously, we've heard one part in particular. Just to say about what Lisa's just said, as a sort of a rule, within the Church of England, the way it works is there's sort of accommodation provided for the clergy. In our case, John, he lives near the church, but everybody else sort of is in accommodation a bit further away and increasingly further out as things go as well. To make the most meaningful impact with the young people in this local community, it makes a difference to have somebody who's really on the ground, who's near to where things are. And so part of the vision for this is actually bringing Lisa closer to the center of things, rather than commuting over an hour to get here each week. And really that means the onus is on us to make this happen. And of course, I don't need to tell you how expensive it can be to rent in areas near to central London. Now, this is really important because I know not everybody of you will have met Lisa or know her before or even come to the morning service. But for those of you in particular who are on kids teams and youth teams and worship teams, coffee teams, people who attend the service occasionally, part of this vision is it's a bit unknown at this stage. And so Lisa's children do not know about this. And so it's really important that we don't mention it in passing if we're at the morning service, just in case there's children wandering around. I'm trusting you with this. Is that okay? Thank you very much. Now, if you look at the forms on your chairs, there's a green form and there's QR codes on there as well if you'd like to do it on the digital side of things. The form allows you to give a one-off gift today. Sometimes that's helpful for people who have irregular giving. Obviously, for us as a church with our planning, regular giving is really useful. And so if you have set up regular giving in the past, but it really needs to be updated, then you could think about that. If you've never signed up for regular giving, even a small amount is really helpful for us and all of our planning. So please have a look at that. You can also pledge money and say, well, actually, I'd really love to give towards this vision and towards the life of the church, but I can't do it today, but I've got work coming in later. You can say that and you just pledge it. You'll see that the stewards are running around with pens if you need them. But what we're going to do now is we're basically going to invite the Spirit to come and speak to us, to say how we can participate in fulfilling this vision and really sharing in the life of our experience as a church together. And I'd be grateful for all of you if you could use one of the giving forms or speak to Sally at the very end of the service. She'll be at the table. She can answer any question you might have about this particular vision, about the giving of the church, how we steward our finances. She'll be there. Okay, that's fine. Can we just take a moment just to pray, and then we'll sing a song during which we take a collection. Dear God, we thank you that all of the money belongs to you. Thank you that you are Lord over all. And we give you thanks for everything that we have received, big or small, for your faithfulness in our lives. Help us to be all that you have called us to be, free and happy, experiencing fullness of life. And help us now to be open to your Spirit. Thank you for all you've done to take away the burden of the law, all those restrictions. And we open ourselves to you now. We open our hands, realizing that all of the money we have is truly yours. And so, Spirit, would you speak to us? How would you like us to respond? Amen. Thank you. Let's stand. We're going to sing a song during which we take a collection. There'll be baskets going around. We don't do that very often, the basket thing, but they'll be coming around. You can put the paper in there. If you want to take it home and think about it, you can do it, or you can take it to Sally and talk to her at the very end. Let's stand, we'll sing the song, and then we'll pray for people at the very end.